Hello everybody, welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about one of the craziest weekends I've had in a while. I took this list that we're going to talk about today, and I not only went to a single tournament with it, but I actually went to 2 tournaments with this deck. I actually won the first tournament and top 4'd the second tournament. So obviously feeling very good about the list, having taken it to 2 pretty significant tournaments, both 50 plus players. Once again, a win and a top 4 under my belt with this deck. So really excited about it. Definitely got some cool stuff, some not so unique things, and then some really interesting stuff in here. So let's dive in and talk about this deck we call Cats, Kings, and so many things, also known as the Emra King. So let's, before we even get into the deck tech and talk about Emrakul and all of those things, kind of go over what we're going to cover today. So I'm going to talk about this deck, go into detail about that, and then I'm going to bring y'all through my rounds for the tournament that I ended up winning. I was taking notes for the other tournament, the second tournament, the one that I ended up going into the top 4 with, but almost every single round in that tournament went to time. So by the time I would get my stuff ready and go into the next round, I would have an entirely new round of Magic that I would have to write down and try and dictate in basically in as much detail as I like to provide for you guys here on the channel. So by the time I was about halfway through, I realized it would not have made for a very good tournament report because a lot of the details were starting to leave my brain because all of these matches were going to time. And it just didn't end up, coming together. So we have the first tournament, as I mentioned, the one that I ended up winning, and we'll talk about that, some of the details, all the things from the rounds and stuff like that. So yeah, as I mentioned, Emrakul the Promised End is one of these spice pieces for this deck. The sort of idea of this originally came from Charles, also known as the Mono White guy. And Charles was testing Emrakul in I believe it was a Thrasios Tymna shell. The idea was that you would get a Wishclaw Talisman, go tutor up Emrakul, pass the Wishclaw Talisman to the person you were going to take their turn, and then play Emrakul for less than the 13 mana because, it does get a reduced cost. But let's read this Emrakul before we go in and start describing why we're playing it. So it's a 13/13 for 13 generic mana. Legendary creature Eldrazi. It costs 1 less to cast for each card type among cards in your graveyards, right? So every artifact, every enchantment, every creature, as long as those different types are out there. I think the cheapest I ended up casting it for over the weekend was 7, but that's pretty cheap. And 7 for a 13/13 that also does this next part, which is whenever you cast Emrakul, you gain control of target opponent during that player's next turn. After that turn, that player takes an extra turn. So basically, you get to choose the player, hijack their turn, and then afterwards they get a turn, but hopefully, you've made enough stuff happen at that point. And then it has Flying Trample and protection from instants, right? So you're not Swordsing or Chain to Vaporing or Psych Rift. Well, I guess you can overload a Psych Rift, but you can't single target Psych Rift Emrakul. So what does all of this mean? The point of Emrakul is that cast trigger, right? That ability to take over someone else's turn. And as you heard me kind of mention, Emrakul is hopefully going to be used to cast to take somebody's turn who's on their turn you can win the game for yourself. And we'll give an example of that as we go through because it did work. We have one game where it really definitively worked. It's ironic, the first day I saw it twice pretty early in the tournament and I didn't see it for a little bit. And then the second tournament, I saw Emrakul 0 times throughout that entire tournament. It just never came up in my draws and the opportunity to tutor for it wasn't really there during those matches. So that was one where it was a little bit, I guess it just didn't really come up in day 2, surprisingly as much. But we'll definitely talk about this card showing up and putting in work on day 1 for sure. So what's the rest of this deck, right? So Kenrith is one of those commanders that is kind of, we call them soupy, right? In the sense that you can play good stuff soup, you can sort of fill the deck with anything and everything. I had noticed that a lot of pilots were doing pretty well with Kenrith lately. And then also a couple months ago, Krurotide, I believe is how you pronounce their username, had reached out to me and said that they've been doing pretty well with a mid-range Kenrith list, which is one of the top ones on EDH top 16 right now. And then I also know PTD had been doing pretty well with sort of a mid-range Kenrith thing for a while. I'd been kind of working with some of my students on, or my coaching recipients on looking at Kenrith as a mid-range deck, and I've been kind of noticing that the deck was picking up momentum. It's been doing pretty well, and it seems to be pretty well positioned in the metagame right now. So I figured might as well give Kenrith a shot. It's a commander I really like because it does sort of mimic that playstyle that I sort of started cEDH on, that early creature grind, that stuff where there's a lot of layered combos with your commander. Your commander does a lot of stuff, right? And activated abilities of your commander are pretty important, right? Like after leaving the Thrasios world, Kenrith is like the best thing to do with like the activated abilities as you move towards the late game, right? And Kenrith gives you so much utility as you go throughout the game. So figured Kenrith would be really fun to try, and I did have a blast. I mean, this commander is awesome, and obviously the results showed that I was able to at least make some good work with it, right? So before we break anything else down, let's talk about the combos in the deck, and that'll give you kind of an idea of like your potential win patterns here. So as you can see, we do have Teferi Time Raveler, 3-mana Teferi, 3 fairy as it's called. The 3-mana Teferi does combo with the ever classic Displacer Kitten, hence the name Cats, Kings, and so many things for this deck. This is classic Displacer Kitten plus Teferi plus either a mana neutral or mana positive rock. You're able to draw through your deck, hopefully net a bit of mana, then get to one of your many other win conditions at the time. You have Thassa's Oracle in this deck, 5-color pile, probably good to just play Thoracle, right? We have Consultation and Tainted Pact in this one. I know some mid-range decks are moving towards just Tainted Pact. Consultation is actually a lot better in Kenrith than it is in other decks because a lot of the time your A plus B combos, right? Mean that you can actually consult your entire library away, right? So for example, if I have something like another one of our combos, like let's say I have Emil on the field with a Dockside Extortionist, right? Or I'm looking for one of those pieces, right? Maybe I have Emil in hand, my opponents have a ton of treasures, and I want to go get Dockside, right? If I Consultation, I can easily exile really any number of cards to go get Dockside, and it doesn't really matter what's left in my deck because of the way Kenrith is worded, right? Because of the way its abilities work, you can either A, infinitely pump your own creatures, give them all haste, go to combat, and just murder your opponents through combat, or you can use Kenrith's other activated ability, the target player draws a card, to actually force your opponents to draw cards. And anytime they go to respond, right, unless they have a split-second effect, you basically just go like, okay, in response to you trying to do something, I'm gonna make you draw a card. And they're like, okay, well, I go to kill Kenrith. And you go, cool, in response, I'll make you draw a card. And then they draw their entire deck, obviously losing the game if they can't have a library, right? So the nice part about that basically is that it doesn't matter how many cards you exile out of your library. If you're going to consult and you have infinite mana, it doesn't matter. You can just use Kenrith's ability. So you can use Consultation a little bit more aggressively than you would in some other builds, right? So Dockside does cover a lot of combos in the deck. Dockside is, turns out, a good card. So it has combos with specifically Emil the Blessed. Obviously you flicker Dockside repeatedly and then make infinite treasures that way. There's also Mayhem Devil with Kenrith, right? So the way this works is if you have Mayhem Devil and Kenrith and Dockside, you can use the treasures from your own Dockside, crack those treasures, shoot your own Dockside so it goes to the graveyard. And then as long as you are making 5 treasures, you can crack the other treasures using Mayhem Devil's ability to hit your opponent's faces, and then use the activated ability of Kenrith, the 5-mana put target creature from a graveyard onto the battlefield under its owner's control, right? So you crack 2, shoot your own Dockside, crack 3, hit your opponents, use the 5 mana you floated in this exchange to bring back the Dockside, it makes another 5 treasures, and the loop continues. That one is definitely a loop that I used a decent amount during the tournament. The one that I used the most by far, though, was the Phantasmal Image loop. So for those who don't know, as long as you have Kenrith and a Phantasmal Image, and there's a Dockside somewhere on the battlefield. It doesn't have to be on your own battlefield, it doesn't have to be on your opponent's battlefield, just as long as there's a Dockside somewhere. You can use Kenrith's ability to put a +1 counter on Phantasmal Image, therefore making it sacrifice itself, goes to the graveyard, use Kenrith's ability to reanimate it, bring it back to the battlefield, make a bunch of treasures. Now, normally you need 8 mana worth of treasures for that to work, right? But there are some other workarounds, right? There are things like Kinnan, which basically double the value of how much your treasures make, right? Obviously being a huge benefit there. So you really only need 4 to make the combo work with Kinnan. Or if you pump up Agatha the Vile Cauldron, it reduces the cost of activated abilities from your command zone, right? So you can then, if you get Agatha all the way up to, I believe, 4 power, right? if you get her all the way up to 4 power, then suddenly the combo only needs 3 treasures to work, right? So there's a little bit of layering there. It's like, yes, it is a very expensive combo. Yes, you need a dockside on board, but it's kind of sneaky with how many times it can actually just be like, oh, and now the combo's working and we get there, right? So those are the dockside combos in the deck. We've talked about the fastest Oracle amount of consultation. We talked about the dockside combos. Let's talk about the other stuff as well. So we also are featuring Underworld Breach in this deck, right? This is a classic 5-color Breach deck, right? We have the intuition lines most often seen in like Najila or Blue Farm, right? You have intuition, you have your Sabine's Reclamation, you have Brain Freeze, all of that stuff, Lion's Eye Diamond, doing the classic LED Breach, Brain Freeze, intuition stuff, right? So just, you know, the best win condition in the format. Seems pretty easy to be able to layer that on top of everything you're doing. And the rest of the deck is a lot more mid-range pile stuff, right? Like it's a lot of, you know, card advantage engines and mana advantage engines like Smothering Tithe and Rhystic Study, and you have Survival of the Fittest, which actually I think in both tournaments I never got an opportunity to play Survival. Like it was either too late in the game or something like that, which might be a knock against Survival, because I definitely do have memories of like having that card in hand, being like, well, I don't have the creatures to play it and start pitching, and like tempo-wise, it doesn't make a lot of sense to play right here. So that might be a criticism against the card for sure. Then you have advantage engines like obviously the One Ring, you have Wishclaw, you have Rhystic and Mystic like we already talked about. I have Talion in the 99, more ways to draw cards. We have Displacer Kit in here, which as we mentioned is a good like value piece for the combo, but like it also works in that fair sense, right? Especially with the dockside or something on the battlefield to be able to loop through those. And technically speaking, Bloom Tender is also a combo in this deck. It's worth mentioning because Bloom Tender and Emil in combination with you having all 5 colors on your board, right? So if Bloom Tender taps for 5 mana, right? And as long as one of that mana is red, you're able to flicker the Bloom Tender with Emil, give it haste with Kenrith, and then tap for enough mana to continue and loop through that process, right? So like Kinnan can technically take a number off of that combo as well, but that is a combo in the deck. It's worth noting. You make infinite of everything but red, I believe. So that's kind of good to know. But yeah, this is that's kind of like the combos of the deck. As I mentioned, there's a bunch of like good stuff. You have card advantage engines and things like Oppo and Ranger Captain and Grand Abolisher, like just some of the best stuff in the format, right? And you do kind of make this like 5-color soup pile, right? Like a lot of it is there's the good stuff, and then there's like these nice, pretty decently high card quality combos, right? Like Mayhem Devil's a combo piece, right? But it's also really good at stopping your opponent's dock size and things like that, right? You definitely notice I have a number of tempo objects like, you know, Oppo and Ranger Captain, things like that, that are meant to keep your opponents off tempo while you yourself are able to press the advantage for sure. I feel like it's always weird, like, especially looking at like the Kenrith artifact base, right? Because you have this sort of like bare bones artifact package, right? You're not running Mox Obel and stuff like that. But it works for Kenrith. I think Kenrith is just one of those decks where you can't build Kenrith the same way you can build everything else. Like you can go through that process, but it's not going to be quite Kenrith being built right, because Kenrith is one of those decks where you need very specific pieces from a lot of different strategies that kind of like work together with Kenrith at the helm, right? It's very much, you do sort of have this like high value, good stuff in cEDH pile, right? But you also have to have a certain amount of synergy pieces that make it worth it to play Kenrith over other pieces. And then you kind of get like a little bit of personalization from the pilots, like what cards they like, things that they are like trying to push for and things like that. And then you also get like certain customizations as far as like pieces you want to attack the specific metagame you're going against. For example, a Dauntless Dismantler in my main board, right? And things like that sort of press your advantage above others. It's one of the best Smothering Tithe decks in the format, right? It's just to be able to, and not best in the way that like it immediately becomes oppressive, but more so in the sense that like Kenrith gives you game into a lot of different situations, and it's not the best at like forcing a win in someone's end step, kind of the way Sisay does, but it's more so in the way that you can be responsible at the table. It's a really good engine to set up, and like it's good if you have allies at the table basically at that point, because you want them to want you to have stuff with the Smothering Tithe. And obviously nowadays a lot of people are relying on Rhystics and Mystics and stuff like that to be able to press any sort of advantage in the format. One big thing that I noticed that I was doing that PTD and Kurotai were not doing is playing Jewel Lotus in the deck. one of the reasons I'm playing Kenrith as a deck is to play Kenrith, right? So for me, I wanted to be able to have access to Kenrith pretty early on. And I know there's a certain amount of investment that you need because like Kenrith is not good without extra mana on top of it. But I found that Kenrith being that 5-drop investment, I kind of wanted to be able to like invest in Kenrith and hold up interaction, or invest in Kenrith and like be able to do other stuff, right? So that's why I ended up going with that option. I feel like Kenrith gets compared to like Sisay Clam Chowder a good amount, right? Where that strategy is very much that kind of like 5-color good stuff pile with a very specific commander in the command zone. I think your card quality is a little bit higher in Kenrith compared to Sisay because you just get the ability to basically win without very specific stuff you need in your deck, right? Like you don't have to play things like Derevi and things like that in your 99 so that you can win with a combo, as opposed to Sisay, which definitely needs to be doing that, right? And has very specific combo lines that they need to work through. I think also Kenrith does give you a certain amount of play in that mid game, right? What I was talking about with like being able to reanimate your threats over and over again, give your creatures haste. Occasionally, it's good to snipe a Thoracle player by forcing them to draw a card after they exile their library. There's a lot of utility with Kenrith, and I think the commander's pretty solid. I think I enjoy it a little bit more than Clam Chowder. The biggest downside with Kenrith versus Clam Chowder is that Sisay comes down pretty early. And to be clear, if people don't know what Sisay Clam Chowder is, it's a variant of Sisay that is not really trying to do the tutor a legend combo win commander game plan. It's more of like good stuff with Sisay at the helm, right? So the benefit of Sisay at the helm is that you can really afford to be like on Deflecting Swat and Fierce Guardianship, which I'm not afraid to try in this deck. And now that I've played the deck once, I might slot that in just to give it a little bit of a try. But the idea is like you don't really have access to Kenrith always super early, so you don't get to really play those cards very confidently. I'm still willing to give Guardianship a try because, as I said, I've been pretty happy with where the list was at, with the potential of how much I cast Kenrith early, especially once again, I'm on the Jeweled Lotus version of the deck, right? So it's like just even more ways to get out in early Kenrith. The Wheel of Fortune, I like never wanted this card. Every single time I had it in my hand during the tournament, either there would be a time where I wanted to cast it, but there needed to be like a lot of politics to like get it to resolve, or there would be a Bowmasters at the table, or I'd be in a position where like I'm trying to gain passive advantage, and if I jam a wheel, I fill up the player who's already in the lead, right? So yeah, wheel was just super disappointing throughout the entire tournament, and to be honest, I would be really happy to cut it in my version. I'm not quite sure what I replace with. I could do the Guardianship like I just talked about, but curious to hear if any other folks in the comments are curious to throw out any ideas what they would play over the wheel in this deck. Apart from that, I don't really have a lot of things I want to change. I really enjoyed playing this deck, and obviously, I guess also Gilded Drake. I was pretty unimpressed by Gilded Drake. I think it came up maybe once through the entire tournament, which was like I stole somebody's Drannith for the win, but I was never tutoring for it. I was never looking for it. Kenrith does enough value in the command zone that it's already better than a lot of other commanders that exist, and it feels like it's only relevant when there's a Drannith out, but when there's a Drannith out, I would probably just want a normal kill spell instead of that, instead of just taking the Drannith. There's a little bit of nuance between that conversation too. It's definitely very interesting. I think those are like the two cards that underperformed the most. The rest of the deck felt really, really solid, and was very happy to be playing it. It was an awesome time, and I'm excited to start breaking down some of these rounds for you guys. So for those who remember, the King's Court is an awesome store in Massachusetts that was featured on this channel a couple months ago. We have a couple pictures here. I love it, from the event, which is pretty sweet. Oh yeah, there's a picture of myself, a couple other folks in there. But yeah, King's Court is a 6 store. As you can see, it's locations there for anyone in the Massachusetts area. They are now doing these tournaments. I think like it's every 2 months, right? Because last one was in March, next one's in July. Then they're already selling out pretty quick. So if you're interested in jumping in for these, they're really, really awesome. I think we got like 50 something players this time because there was a crew of 10 people that was supposed to come down but ended up bailing last minute, which was a little sad because I think some other folks could have jumped in those spots. But yeah, no, it was a great time. Genuinely, super cool store, really cool environment. The owner, Steve, is a really nice dude and makes it really, really cool to be there. But yeah, this King's Court once again. Love to shout out folks in the Massachusetts area, and I just wanted to shout out the store because they're sick. And I'll include their info in the description down below if anyone's curious. So round one was both interesting and iconic. So in first seat, we have Clam Chowder, once again, the 5-color good stuff Sisay variant. You're gonna hear Clam Chowder come up a lot in this one because you might not guess this, but the deck nicknamed New England Clam Chowder was brewed up in Massachusetts. So New England Clam Chowder is very popular in this area and with this particular demographic of players. So it's gonna come up a lot. Seat 2 is Dargo Thrasios, then you have myself and Blue Farm. So I keep a hand in third seat that's like a turn 1 Ignoble Hierarch into a Ranger Captain or an Opposition Agent for turn 2, which I'm like super happy about, right? Like a lot of flexibility. I can kind of read the table and figure out what's happening with that sort of thing. So I'm able to get down the Ranger Captain on that second turn as we go around the table. Everyone's kind of like slowly setting up their engines. No one's going too crazy, right? And we get to myself for that second turn. I choose to play the Ranger Captain instead of flashing in the Oppo. I think the pod was moving slow enough where I was like, I can kind of next turn have the potential of like playing, and I think because of the double white, I would not be able to go triple white next turn for like Ranger into Esper Sentinel, right? As opposed to I could play the Ranger this turn and then have the mana to go Oppo plus Esper Sentinel too, right? That was a big part of my decision making there, and I didn't think the Oppo was necessary enough, given like Sisay wasn't on the board ready to activate and stuff like that. Sisay was there, but didn't have 5 mana. Then Blue Farm goes, okay, Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual. Once again, they're in last seat on turn 2. And we're like, oh God, are we dead already? And then they hit us with a wheel, right? And everyone was just kind of like, yeah, no, right, fair enough, right? So we kind of all get reset at this point. Sisay untaps, plays a One Ring, right? And this is sort of like the beginning of the end to everything that happens in this game. Over the next couple turns, sort of like shrunk down the details for the next couple turns, but the TLDR is Sisay starts doing a couple things. They have the One Ring, they're starting to tap it for mana. Dargo Thrasios is really stuck on mana for a really long time. Even post-wheel, they only have red and blue mana. So they're just stuck, they're not able to get Dargo down. I think they have a Cradle, but no creatures in play, right? So they're in a rough spot. Blue Farm is just kind of like, didn't have the best wheel, so they're recovering a little bit. I'm kind of holding up, kind of figuring out how to interact with the new hand. I just play a bunch of mana and stuff like that, right? We get all the way back to Sisay again, and now they're tapping the One Ring, they're drawing more cards, we're all getting very nervous, and we're like, okay, Sisay's starting to really press ahead in this game, and I'm already kind of like kicked as far as cards are concerned. Sisay also then plays an Agatha Soul Cauldron and proceeds to eat my Ranger Captain of Eos in the graveyard, which was like super big alarm bells for all of us, right? So now there's a Sisay that's a Ranger Captain, all that stuff is going on. We are greatly concerned, and I believe at some point, Dargo Thrasios, I believe at this point, has to Blasphemous Act, but Sisay has enough time to basically, we know next turn they can just play a dude and then Ranger Captain it, and then they have a One Ring and like 8 cards in hand, right? So we are all quite concerned. I believe post Blasphemous Act, I play Italian and pass through once again. There's sort of like this Cold War thing. Sisay, just because of the Blasphemous Act, needed to recover a little bit mana-wise, right? So they play an Ignoble Hierarch, they hold up a bunch of mana, all that stuff. Dargo Thrasios just like sacks some of their mana rocks, plays their Dargo. I get a Dockside out, and I'm looking at Emrakul in my hand, right? I'm like, yeah, I can jam this Emrakul here. And this is, for those who haven't played with Emrakul, textbook Emrakul solution, right? Like this is exactly the situation in which you want this card. So the fact that I am day 1 of a 2 tournament streak, round 1 in the perfect scenario for Emrakul has me giddy. I am like giggling like a little schoolboy. And I have exactly 9 mana because of the cards in my graveyard, reducing its cost by 4. I just slam the Emrakul, fully tap out. So my entire board is just Talion Emrakul, nothing else, boom. Cast trigger goes in the stack. Everyone looks at it, they go, yeah, countering it doesn't matter, whatever. And I go, cool. This Sisay player who seems unbeatable at this current moment, I will take your next turn. They're like, yeah, you got me, right? No deflecting SWAT here, right? So we go through that. Blue Farm just kind of goes like, all right, I'm gonna hold up mana and pass, I guess. I don't really know what the dynamic is here, right? and I don't really know how to they were basically like, I'm not gonna jam into this very tight situation, so let me just hold up a direction, be responsible, right? So then we pass to Sisay me turn. So I literally get up, move around the table, sit in Sisay's seat. Sisay's like, green light, go ahead, have fun. I get there, I draw a bunch of cards off the one ring, and immediately, like first game action, tap the Agatha's Soul Cauldron, putting a counter on the Ignoble Hierarch. The Ignoble actually might have already had a counter now that I think about it, because this would have been a choke point, and I don't think my opponents even had that opportunity. I'm pretty sure I just untapped with the Ignoble, with a counter on it, because maybe Sisay did it on their last turn. The timeline's a little fuzzy here, So there's this Ranger Captain Ignoble Hierarch, right? So on my main phase, I'm like, cool, tap a mana, crack it, and everyone's just like, and then I draw 3 out the one ring, and they're like, yep, totally, man. And so now I have this Ranger Captain protected turn, right? I have my own Talion out, right? Which is awesome, because now I'm able to play spells, and any 2-drops I play in control of Sisay is me feeding real me cards. Loving that, right? So basically we end up in a scenario where I'm able to do an intuition line to get Underworld Breach set up. One important thing that I do, specifically for myself, is that I leave a Chain of Vapor in my yard. Now the cool thing about this interaction is that I target myself with the intuition, controlling Sisay. Once again, I'm controlling Sisay, targeting the real me player with intuition. So I give myself basically the pile that's like, all right, cool, here's the breach in hand. I have a couple other pieces either in the graveyard or in my hand or whatever, right? And then I put the Chain of Vapor in there very specifically, right? I start going through the breach line, drawing myself a bunch of cards with Talion, right? Getting a bunch of cards in hand so that basically if I'm in need to protect Sisay's protection, I can do something about it, right? But eventually I get a critical mass of cards, enough in my graveyard, or I guess Sisay's graveyard, so that I can bounce my own Talion back to my real hand. And then through Sisay's deck, I fully execute an Underworld Breach line in the sense that I just start Brain Freeze, Lion's Eye Diamond looping, milling. So I, as Sisay, once again, cracking an LED, crack my hand, get rid of Savine's Reclamation by like flashing it back on nothing relevant, right? And I mill my entire library, once again, as Sisay, with no hand. I then proceed to mill Dargo Thrasios completely out, and then I proceed to mill Blue Farm completely out. And then I don't remember, I did like something at the end where I like basically gave myself a bunch more cards too. And then I looked at my opponents and I go, okay, you guys don't have libraries. Are you good to concede? And they were like, yeah. So I was able to like do the Emrakul thing right away, right? Fully protected Underworld Breach line through my opponent. Once again, I didn't mill myself at all. So I was able to go to my turn and have everything ready to go. But yeah, Sisay untapped, had no hand, drew a card, lost the game. Dargo Thrasios, absolutely same thing, right? Did the thing, and it was super sick. Yeah, it was really cool, and was able to win through my butts things. So starting the tournament off 1-0. Okay, so this next one, this was a crazy game. All right, so I'm in the 1-0 bracket. In front of me is Eric DeVoe on Clue Farm. For those who don't know, Eric's been around for a while, great Massachusetts player. Basically only plays the Clue Farm list, which is the Will and Lucas, or yeah, Will and Lucas variant of that archetype. Then it's myself in second seat. We have 4 mana Rakdos, Lord of Riots, in the 3rd spot. And that might sound crazy to y'all, but to me, it was just a normal Massachusetts tournament. We have a lovely player named CJ who has been playing this deck forever, does pretty consistently well with it, despite it being like a very fringe strategy. And like top 10s a lot of these tournaments on this Rakdos list. So yeah, Rakdos Lord of Riots, the black, red cost reducer, super crazy list. That's in the pod. And then in the last spot is the Rograk Thrasios list, the sort of turbo teamer list, right? So turn 1, Eric goes Mana Crypt into Gamble, and ends up pitching a Ristic Study to Gamble. So we were like, I wonder what we gambled for. Then it goes to me. I just get a little fast mana going. And then I have the option to either turn 1 Wheel of Fortune, right? Or turn 1 Mystic Remora. Now my thought process was, had the gamble not pitched the Ristic Study, right? I would be more comfortable with the turn 1 wheel, because the turn 1 wheel to me, after someone gambles and then doesn't play anything, would be very impactful. But seeing as Eric pitched the Rhystic Study, I'm expecting him not to have a follow-up plan because he gambled and then lost his advantage engine, right? So I don't want to refill his hand and then send him on his way. And I'm like, Mystic Remora is still plenty good, right? So leave down the fish, pass the turn, right? Rakdos just Imperial Seals passes, and the Rog Thrasios player I think goes like Mana Crypt Bloom Tender, which is like pretty good for that deck after playing Rograk too, right? So, next turn they're untapping with land drop, makes it 6 mana. So we're a little bit like noted, right? Not that my fish and crypt is also scary, right? Eric untaps, just immediately plays a 1 ring, and we're like, okay, right? So I felt immediately punished in the sense that like, thought I made a pretty good play by not wheeling on turn 1, and then just immediately like, oh, here's my second card advantage. We're like, okay. Then on my second turn, I get out Arcane Signet, get out Drain of Magistrate, just sort of pass it up. Rakdos and the Rog Thrasios are pretty locked out. Rog, because he can't get Thrasios and is not able to like use all the mana to grind, right? He's only got like 1 or 2 cards left in hand. I think he mulled down lower. And Rakdos does use Rakdos a lot, right? And he's like drawing none of his removal, right? So then we kind of do a couple rotations of the table where Eric's just kind of like still recovering. I mean, he also can't cast his commanders, right? So there's some stuff disrupting him a little bit on that side. I'm just playing a bunch of mana and some advantage engines and things like that. And eventually they get scared and Gilded Drake my Kenrith, which I understand, not happy about it, right? Rog Thras plays a Dockside. I get Phantasmal Image and I make a copy of the Dockside as well. Then we basically get to a point where we all kind of don't have everything we need to go, right? I am down my commander. Rakdos at some point drops down to Bowmasters, right? So that's sort of keeping Eric a little bit in check, and my Remora's dead at this point, right? So we're all just kind of like in this weird standoff stalemate thing, right? And Eric is very clearly ahead in first seed. So I'm like, all right, round 2. Once again, the only 2 things in my hand are Wheel and Emrakul, and I'm like, let's run it back. Let's Emrakul him, and I slam the Emrakul. And he deflecting swats my cast trigger by fully tapping out for a deflecting swat, and nobody has an answer to it. And I was like, no. And he goes, yeah, instead you can take Rakdos' turn. Now, once again, Rakdos has no Granite out. They have 3 cards in hand. I do nothing with that extra turn, right? So I go to combat, poke Eric for a couple points of damage. I take Rakdos' turn. I draw for his deck. He has 3 cards in hand. 2 of the 3 I think are affected by Jessica's Will, or are affected by Drain of Magistrate, one of them being Jessica's Will, to be clear. And I'm like, oh, your hand literally does nothing, and it has like a Burgie, and I'm like, I'm not gonna play a Burgie for you, that seems very bad, and I'm not gonna fully take him out of the game because Clue Farm is just so far ahead at this point. We clearly have one enemy, right? And so I'm sitting here with the 13-13 going, well, I guess damage is what we're doing, so I used Rakdos' Bowmasters and a couple other creatures. He had a couple small ones, and we just full send like 9 damage at Eric. And then I pass. Rakdos gets another turn, basically does the exact same thing when they untap, can't really do anything helpful, and full send even more damage at Eric, right? So his life total is starting to get a little bit pressured at this point, but yeah, things are a little tenuous. We're still feeling like we're on the losing end of stuff. Rog Thras kind of just doesn't do a whole ton. And so now we get to this weird place where it goes back to Rog Thras. Eric's drawing, his life total is really low, but he can't really stitch anything together given the current board state and what will like I'm holding up mana and Rog Thras holding up mana and stuff like that. So it gets back to me. One thing that I think we missequenced a little bit is that Eric's actually able to get out his Izzet commander, Lucas or Bjornog? No, yeah, Bjorna. So he actually has the blue-red commander out, right? So he can ping the Bowmasters, he could go with the Emrakul, right? There's a lot of stuff he could do with that Bjorna out, right? And this is on my turn. So we're kind of in this weird stalemate, and I'm like, listen. So I'm like, all right, I think I'm forced to put this wheel on the stack. So I play the wheel. And I'm like, well, you have the pinger there, right? You can just sack one of your artifacts, ping Orcish Bowmaster so we don't take 20 something damage and Rakdos doesn't run away with the game. And then Eric thinks about it for a second, does it, right? Because it kind of works out best for him. But then he flashes in his own Orcish Bowmasters, right? So then all of us are like, oh, dang, right? We're about to get housed by the person who is in this control position. And basically, because of the way the conversation went, because of the interaction in our hands and stuff like that, Eric's like, listen, I don't want to force an issue here with this position. I know you guys are going to fight over the Bowmasters, right? Because we did have stuff that we could sort of fight over it. And he goes, I'm going to hose Rakdos' entire board. I'm going to hit Rakdos in the face. And I'm not going to send any Bowmasters damage to anybody else for this wheel. And we all have to think about that for a really long time, for within reason of the game. Obviously, no slow play was had, but basically we get to that point, right? Part of what made this part of the conversation very interesting was that, Thrasrog did have my Kenrith, and I was like, oh, hey, you have black mana because of one of their mana rocks. I was like, you can activate Kenrith right now to reanimate my Phantasmal Image, which can then shoot Eric's Phantasmal Image of Bowmasters, right? I can make it a copy of Bowmasters and I can mow down his whole thing. And the Thrasios Rograt player was like, oh, I really don't know if I want to be doing that. He starts humming and hawing, and then Eric's like, listen, here's how we can make this even, right? Once again, I'll only shoot down Rakdos' board and Rakdos' stuff, right? Which I think kind of was like the least offensive scenario that anyone had pitched, right? So that's what happens is Rakdos gets his whole thing blown up. Then I can play a couple things. I'm able to Gilded Drake my own Kenrith back. I try to reanimate, and this is where things get interesting. I have Phantasmal Image in my graveyard now, right? After I've Gilded Drake, after the wheel happens, after all that stuff. I try to reanimate my own Phantasmal Image, only netting a couple treasures because the Thrasios Rograk player does have a couple treasures in the battlefield, and just like a few too many for me to be comfortable, right? And my hope is that reanimating the Phantasmal Image will make him crack the treasures, which will make his plan get disrupted. But Rakdos ends up casting a Deflecting Swat with the mana that they had up, with the attempt to change it to their graveyard so they can reanimate the Fireweaver, I want to say Reckless Fireweaver, yeah, which is the thing that pings for 1 damage. And I'm like, look, man, before you officially declare that you want to cast this spell, like, I think it's important to wipe some of Thrasios' rocks, and then I can hold up interaction for the other 2 players to be able to handle the scenario. It's important to know Eric is at 7 life, which goes into a lot of this decision making for the next couple plays, right? And Rakdos is very confident. They're like, no, I definitely want to get my thing back. Like, I can do something, right? We get to Rakdos' turn, and they do a bunch of stuff. Basically, they play a Dockside, burn everybody for a bunch. They play Mikaeus also, and then they pass the turn, right? After doing a couple other small things like play some mana rocks and stuff like that. Rog Thrasios is the person I'm most scared of right now, because we are scared of going into Eric's turn, but Rog Thras kind of got refreshed. They had a couple of things going for him. It's not fantastic here, right? And this is one of the reasons I was saying, please let me get the Fimage back to crack the treasure, right? The Rog Thras immediately just drops a Baron, right? And we realize that with Eric's board, they have enough to do the Baron plus Dockside loop. So Rakdos does some crazy stuff where they cast a Burn Offering, sacrificing their own Dockside, which then triggers Mikaeus to have it come back to the battlefield. And I think they do maybe one other thing, but they have exactly enough treasures now to have that enter the battlefield and then do lethal amount of damage to Eric. So Eric dies with the recast of Dockside back on the battlefield to start the Baron loop, right? Unfortunately, because of how many treasures that Thrasios Rograk had stored, they are able to tutor through their library, go and grab a Kinnan, and because of the Kinnan, it now doubles the amount that the treasures make, and therefore they're able to still go through the Baron Dockside loop and kill me and Rakdos as well. Okay, so this next round, I feel like is some sort of karmic balance because it was very heavily dominated by an Atali deck. So it's Tivit in first spot, then very cool player playing Thrasios Vial, which is very much like a binder Thrasios Vial, or a cards I like in cEDH that are atypical binder file, clearly a a passion project of a deck that is playing a lot of weird cards, but like the pilot was very comfortable with. I believe they go by Sheikah. Really cool to play against. Clearly knew what they were doing with their deck and their strategy, and very confident with their plays. So it was pretty sick to play against them. So that's on Thrasfile, then myself, and then Atali in 4th seat as well. So Tivit, Remora, turn 1. Thrasios Vial, Remora, turn 1. I don't remember what I did during the first turn of the game, but I think I just played, pretty sure I just played like Mana Rock Pass, right? Atali right away, just super immediately, jams into the double Mystics with a Dockside into a Treasonous Ogre thing. And I believe this is actually on the second rotation of the table. I'm sort of speed writing some of these notes about the earlier part of the game. So the second rotation of this table, this Treasonous Ogre into Atali jamming session happens. And so they sort of jam into it once again into the 2 Remoras. I just have a Tainted Pact. I'm holding up at this point. I think it's just like Tainted Pact or Eladamri's Call. So I Tainted Pact, I have to get an answer to the Atali because even though through everything, the Mystic Remora players don't have enough to be able to answer the problem. There's also a couple pieces on Thrasios' board. I don't remember if they have Thrasios itself, but they have a couple creatures. So Atali jams and jams and jams, and we eventually have enough resources to stop them going off. And the thing is with my Tainted Pact, and the thing that's relevant about this Tainted Pact is I proceed to exile most of the tutors of my deck in this first Tainted Pact because I needed to find a specific answer for Atali. Like I think literally in a row it was Demonic Tutor, Wishclaw Talisman, and one other black tutor, like 1, 2, 3. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And I just like flip over a bunch of stuff I do not want to be exiling. So it was a very bad Tainted Pact, had to get an answer. You deal with what you can, right? So I'm really low on tutors, which kind of explains the stalling my deck does for the rest of this game, because it just like, if I have a single tutor at any of these points, I can maybe turn the corner for myself, right? So we get back and survive the Atali turn, and Tivit just goes, yeah, well, I don't have enough mana. I have like all these cards, right? But I'm not like, I don't have enough mana to like go do anything crazy myself. So let's just jam this Deluge, right? So Atali's down to like 15 or something at this point, right? So they've taken a healthy amount of damage to jam the Treasonous Ogre win, which you got to be doing, right? But yeah, so they went pretty heavily into that process. They're pretty low, and so the Deluge happens, completely wipes the board, right? Luckily, I didn't have any creatures at the time, so despite me being in kind of a bad position board-wise, I'm pretty happy about this Deluge, right? Sheikah just untaps and just starts like playing a couple value pieces, right? Passes to me. I don't really have anything. I'm just holding up more mana and passing the turn. Goes back to Atali. Atali's like Invasion for Vicoria for Dockside. Let's go again. Jams Atali, kind of whiffs. We get to Thrasfile. So at this point, Thrasfile gets a Dockside into play. Then immediately plays Displacer Kitten as well. We're like, oh, F, right? Plays Lion's Eye Diamond, flickers the Dockside, goes to play another spell. In response, cracks the LED. So they don't have any hand, but they need the mana to like keep pushing through the deck because they don't really have anything more gas in the hand as opposed to, the already crazy amount of advantage they've already got going on for them at this point. Yeah, they just start storming. They just start storming like crazy. Now I have 2 mana open at this time. I have an Offer You Can't Refuse and an Opposition Agent, right? Sheikah just starts pushing and pushing and pushing, going through a bunch of stuff, like going to try and win the game. Just trying to basically, flicker Dockside, use the mana to activate Thrasios. Thrasios hits a non-creature, plays it again, flickers the Dockside, do the thing like over and over and over and over and over again, just for a significant portion of this game. I'm like, Sheikah, like at this point, like I can see you're trying to shove here. I'd rather have to keep my pieces up for Atali. Like if I show you something, can I convince you to like stop jamming here? Cause like, I know you said you're looking for a tutor to go get your thing, right? So I show them the Opposition Agent. Now I only have 2 mana up. But Sheikah kind of assumes by me showing them that it's because I have the mana to be able to flash in the Oppo. I was thinking I could, cause for a second I got confused thinking I could counter my own spell with an Offer You Can't Refuse, but I couldn't. I could only counter someone else's spell, right? But at the time I proposed the Opposition Agent thing, I had convinced myself that I could cast it by like countering my own spell if I really needed to, but I couldn't do that because I didn't count correctly, right? So I have the Oppo, but I do have the Offer You Can't Refuse, right? Which is relevant to what happened. So basically does like a whole thing where they're going off. Atali is able to get a draw for some reason. I can't remember specifically why they had a draw, but they got a draw, and they Rending Volley the Displacer Kitten, which is the uncounterable 4 damage spell, in response to other stuff going on, right? With that, eventually she gets, is flicking through, finds something to be able to flicker the kitten. But importantly, that's a spell to flicker the kitten and not to flicker the dockside, right? So like that's an important interaction that happened there, is that happened. Because that is like one less iteration as we go through. And then eventually she hits a Wish Claw, goes for it, and they also tutor, or they don't tutor, but they stop at a dress down, right? So if I play the Oppo, they can just dress down in response and then proceed to use the Wish Claw to crack the tutor, right? So I'm like, even if I could Oppo right now, I wouldn't Oppo right now, because the dress down is there and it's very clearly an answer to the problem. So I'm much more likely to have success by holding up this thing that they don't know about, which is the offer you can't refuse, right? So they crack the Wish Claw. And once again, only like 1 or 2 cards left in hand, right? Because they've been digging and digging and digging and digging. And they go for, I can't remember what it was, because I think they milled Breach earlier, right? Which would have made this process a lot easier on them. Or they pitched Breach away to the Wheel of Fortune, which was cast very early on, right? I think the wheel was played by Atali, I'm pretty sure. It was forever ago at this point, or myself, I actually don't remember. They have basically to go for this line, and I can't remember what exactly they ended up using. It was some sort of tutor. They Wish Clawed and then went for some non-creature spell, and I was able to offer it. And at that point, they had used a lot of their mana. I did this in response to the Displacer Kitten trigger, so they really only had the dress down. They didn't have enough mana to cast the dress down to be able to stop going for the win there. So they get stopped by the offer because they were working with information they weren't aware of, right? And they're playing around the Oppo in the hand instead, right? So able to counter that, stop them from winning. They also have a thing where they have, during that process, they had crop rotation for an emergent zone, which is very relevant to stuff that's about to happen later on. And eventually they did also realize that because later down in the process, they drew the Imposter mech from the deck, which once again will come into play later in this story. They could have actually gone through and done a loop with Atali and Displacer Kitten, copied through Imposter Mech, right? There was no Atali on the battlefield at this point because it had either been sacked to state-based effects or something. There was a reason it wasn't there. This Atali Imposter Mech interaction does come up later, right? I go to my turn and I'm like, Chica already has a very scary board. I want to get them to use the dress down, right? That's in their hand. So I play Phyrexian Metamorph. There is a dockside on the board. We all know what's going to happen if that is allowed to resolve. So dress down happens, my Metamorph dies. I get to hold up a little bit of interaction, pass, right? Atali jams again. And at this point, we know that Tivit top deck tutors an answer for Displacer Kitten dockside things happening, right? We know that happened. I don't remember how or why they had to search their library and put the answer on top when they did, but at some point they had to put the answer, which we knew was board wipe, right? That was going to wipe all the Displacer Kitten nonsense, right? So Atali jams, but Languish is part of the full cycle of stuff. I'm basically begging them to play the Languish first as we go through the process because they're not going to be able to pop off with my interaction I have in hand, including the opposition agent, right? And we basically get to a scenario where they sequences to the Languish happens later, so I have to flash in the Oppo, steal their Imperial Suitor that they hit, Imperial Seal, that they stole off the top of somebody else's deck, and I get a free tutor. I think I get a Breach at that point, yeah. And I'm like, well, yeah, I can't find any answers for what you're doing, so I'm gonna get something that's a threat of my own. Once again, remember, I do not have any tutors left at this point in my deck, right? So I'm just like, sure, I'll take anything. So, and also I think the dockside count was pretty bad at this point too, right? So the Languish eventually happens, kills the Oppo, but I still did steal the tutor, and Atali sort of fizzles because of the sequencing that happens there. So now everyone knows I have a Breach. Tivit goes, don't worry, I got an answer. They Savines back a Graph Diggers and another Wish Claw because the Wish Claw from Thrasios File Smasher had already gone to Tivit. So now Tivit has 2 Wish Claws. We know that if it gets back to Tivit, things are looking very bad, right? Thrasios File Smasher just untaps. I think they replay Thrasios, pass with the Emergent Zone up. It's again relevant. I go to cast Etali's Underworld Breach. In my hand, I have Odawara, right? So I'm able to Odawara bounce the Grafdigger's Cage, but I want to try and resolve Breach with the Grafdigger's Cage still there, so that my opponents maybe think there's more of a window than there is, right? So, and also so that I can hold sort of my answers close to my chest for longer. Tivit hits me with a Spell Snare. I throw back a Swan Song. Tivit looks at the table and goes, this is all I had. Thrasios File Smasher goes, well, time to prey on the top decks. They crack the Emergence Zone, and they flash in Imposter Mech as a copy of Etali. And one of the 4 cards happens to be a Silence, which is the only thing, one of very few things, I should say, that I did not have an answer for. So they needed to either hit a counter spell for the specific problems or a Silence off the top of the libraries, and that's exactly what they did. And I was distraught that the luck had just broken so bad on me right there in that game. So that was rough. So I get silenced mid-breach turn. The breach just cracks, goes to the Etali player's graveyard. We have like maybe 3 or 4 minutes left. And I look at the players and I go, look, people are gonna jam here. And it's just a matter of who's gonna jam first into this board state, and the first person to like not, it's like messy at this point after everything that just happened. And I was like, do we want to just call it a draw? And everyone was just like, yeah, like, cause I think Etali looked like they had a good board state, but I had seen their hand with the Oppo and they had nothing, right? So I think it was in their best interest to be able to draw there. And I think Tivit was scared of Etali popping off, so they also wanted to draw in that scenario. So once again, it was only like 3 to 5 minutes before the natural conclusion of the round, but we decided to ID because, you know, no one was winning anytime soon. We were like, let's just call it clean so it doesn't get thrown away for no reason, right? So round 4, my first time going in first, so we take those, yeah. It was myself, then Clam Chowder Sisay second, although I didn't know that at the time, which will come up later. Najila in third, and then Dollmaker Thrasios in fourth, which is pretty cool to see. I get to play a Mystic Remora on the play, like, heck yeah, it's the time to play it, right? Pass, Sisay goes Mana Dork pass, Najila goes Esper Sentinel pass, Thrasios Bruce plays Mystic Remora. You're gonna see a common theme of Thrasios Bruce mimicking my play patterns. I pay for fish, I play a Mana Dork, and I pass the turn, right? Just slow development. I have Mana Vault, Smothering Tithe in my hand, but I figure at this point, I might as well develop a mana that's a little bit more consistent, and then I'm not double feeding Thrasios Bruce's Remora, and I'm not over investing into this board state, right? Sisay then plays a Cradle into a Bloom Tender, right? So my alarm bells are starting to go off. I'm like, oh, if that's Tutor Chain Sisay, we're in a lot of trouble, right? Najila sort of just plays another thing, gets Najila out, not too crazy situation, right? Thrasios Bruce, they play something turn 2 that wasn't that impactful. I think they did the same thing where they like paid for fish and then played something else. Then it goes back to me, and I look at Clam Chowder Sisay, and I think I might have actually asked them this a little bit earlier, but I was like, hey, do you want to tell me if you're on Clam Chowder or not? Because if you're on Clam Chowder, Gaia's Cradle into Bloom Tender is good, but it's not, oh my god, game warping scary, right? If you're on Tutor Chain Sisay, I have to start treating you like a threat right now. And so like if they're on Tutor Chain Sisay, right, it's advantageous for them to say nothing, right? And they'll just be like, well, you know, like you make some sort of comment about how a lot of people play Clam Chowder, right? But if they're on Clam Chowder, it's advantageous for them to be honest to me, right, in this situation and be like, nah, I'm on Chowder, like you don't have to worry about tutoring with Bloom Tender and stuff like that, because that is the case, right? There are technically like Bloom Tender lines in Chowder, but they're a lot harder to piece together than in traditional Tutor Chain Sisay, right? So they were like, no, I'm on Clam Chowder, don't worry about it. And I was like, sick, great. And that was true. So at this point I go play that Mana Vault, finally play the Smothering Tithe. Super happy about that. We're geeked out about the scenario. Sisay just plays a little bit more development on their board. Najila plays one more thing, gets their first Najila attack in, and then we go to Thrasios Bruce, who plays their own Smothering Tithe, right? So everybody's really setting up, but at this point, my hand is gas because I've drawn a bunch of cards off the Remora pretty early, not a ton, right? But enough that I feel a little bit of momentum in my favor, right? And now I've had an entire turn rotation of 1 Esper Sentinel, 1 Remora with the Smothering Tithe out, right? So I have a decent amount of mana, and even though Thras Bruce is about to untap the Smothering Tithe, I'm feeling great, right? I don't remember if I have the Dockside in hand already, or if I have to vamp. Oh, I do have to Vampiric Tutor at end step, right? But it's before the Smothering Tithe from Thrasios Bruce makes any treasures, and it seems like everyone else is fully tapped out because they're developing their own game plan. And so I'm good to get that Vamp Tutor off. We get to my turn, I have a healthy amount of mana. I just play a Range Captain, crack it right away, silence my opponents. I go Emil plus Dockside, and with the Dockside Flicker on the stack, my opponents are doing the math, and one of them realizes they have an Otawara to be able to stop me, even though they're under the silence from the Ranger Captain, because Otawara gets right through that, right? Unfortunately, the math worked out that no matter what happened, the Otawara didn't affect anything, because if they bounce the Dockside with Otawara on the stack, I just replay the Dockside, or with Emil on the stack, I should say. I just replay the Dockside and get a bunch of treasures back, still fine there. If they bounce the Emil in response to the Dockside Flicker, it doesn't matter. And I believe if they bounce the Dockside, then I can just replay it too. So in no iteration of the loop did they have enough to be able to Otawara and disrupt what I was doing. So luckily I had exactly enough to be able to pop off and go infinite with Dockside, right? So, that was the one easy game of the day for sure. Sometimes the cards just kind of line up and you go in first and you play a bunch of advantage engines that get you exactly enough tempo to get there, right? So that was definitely the only game where my cards really just kind of like lined up for me very well. Round 5 was one of the craziest rounds of Magic the Gathering that I've played in a long time, and it was a really cool game. So I'm in 3rd against Blue Farm, Marneus, and then Blue Farm. Everybody mulls pretty low, every single person. But player 1, who mulls to 4, Imperial Seals for Aristic, turn 1, plays Mana Crypt, passes the turn. We were like, okay, that was a pretty good opener from this Blue Farm deck. The game grinds for a really long time. And so I don't have a lot of details of the like turn by turn for this game, because this was a game that went 10 minutes overtime because I was trying to execute a game winning loop in the last minute of turns that took a long time, right? So I don't have the turn by turn plays for this game. But basically in that first rotation, Blue Farm and player 4 seat tries to play a Remora, it gets mental misstepped. I think I only played some generic value stuff, nothing like Remora level scary, right? And we basically get to a point where once again, we started these low mulls, right? The Ristic player in seat 1 playing Blue Farm is definitely starting to pick up a bit of the advantage. Eventually Marneus gets his own Ristic study, right? And I'm sort of dominating the control part of the game, or not control part, but the board state part of the game, because Blue Farms have their Tymna Crom thing going on, right? They're doing that. But I've also Phantasmal Imaged a Tymna, and I'm attacking with Kenrith every turn. There's also a Kinnan on my board state, but it's not really doing a lot to help me out. But Kenrith being one of my attackers, one player being kind of open for a lot of the game, meant that I was able to basically use my copy of Tymna for a really long time, and no Boatmasters came down. So I got kind of lucky in that sense that there was no like throw away 1 damage to the Fimage so that Ian doesn't draw a bunch of cards, right? I also was never really like the threat per se at the table for a long time, because the Blue Farm, who was drawing a ton of cards off the Ristic study, was definitely the scary person for a really long time. Luckily, they were also taking a ton of damage from like a Mana Crypt and an Ancient Tomb and stuff like that. So their life total was under pressure during a lot of this. And also I'm hitting them with Kenrith, which is like, Kenrith is a big boy. Like he is not messing around, right? Eventually Blue Farm starts using Crom very defensively, right? Grinds for forever and ever and ever and ever. Eventually, after like many turns of a lot of us going to combat, drawing cards, passing, me drawing so many lands, like flooding so bad, but having enough interaction to like stop somebody if they went off, but nothing to develop my own game plan, right? I play Teferi out. Teferi gets answered. It maybe looks like I was a little aggressive with that at that point, but I was like, like playing Teferi just wins the game if it resolves, right? Especially in this locked out board state, right? So it gets answered, people cast their spells, all that stuff. Blue Farm doesn't have it on that turn because they're a little out of it, because at one point they attacked with Crom into the Marnius player, who I pumped their Talion so it could block the prom, so then that blue farm player starts lagging a bit behind, and the other blue farm player eventually loses to their own Ancient Tomb and Mana Crypt, right? They eventually, after turns and turns and turns of surviving on like 2 to 3 life, and you know, there were definitely turns where all of us were kind of like, we could kill you right now, but we're gonna let you do the thing, because as soon as you die, like stuff's gonna start firing off, right? So we were all kind of setting up for that circumstance, and then obviously the blue farm was like trying to keep himself alive. We knew he had a Chain of Vapor too, which stopped me from just sort of like incidentally killing him a couple times, because I was like, I'm not about to have my Kenrith Chain of Vapored and then have the other 2 players completely unlocked while their shield's down. You know what I mean? It's gonna be a whole thing, right? So very long standoff. Eventually, as I said, the situation, I play the Teferi, it gets answered. Marnius gets a Grand Abolisher. We silence them, right? It gets back to my turn. And that's with the blue farm player still around. The blue farm player plays an Angel's Grace on their turn, so they don't die to their own Mana Crypt, does a whole bunch of stuff, and basically goes to negative life. They can't assemble a win during that turn. This is once again the blue farm player in first seat, who's been the problem with the most cards the whole game. They go to their cleanup step, their Angel's Grace wears off, they die. The Marnius player, we answer their Grand Abolisher, and then it gets to me. So I have Ranger Captain. I jam the Ranger Captain, and it eats a counterspell. I then reanimate it through, I don't remember if it's through Kenrith's ability or if it's through something else that I reanimate. Oh, I reanimate it with Savine's Reclamation. That's exactly right. So I go to Savine's back Ranger Captain, and once again, like this is at this point where there's been just a lot of stuff back and forth. We're all sort of starting to get kicked at this point. I hit my microphone, but I Savine's back the Ranger Captain. They don't have anything else, but our player on Marnius hits me with an Angel's Grace, right? So now I have to assemble a win. Meanwhile, to be clear for some context, because I know we skipped over a lot of like the setup turns of this game, I had so many opportunities to potentially win this game if there was not a blind obedience in play. That's the big problem with what we're dealing with here, right? Is like there is a blind obedience, and it is fully a pain in my butt stopping me from winning this game. There are also now 2 Talions on the battlefield. There is a Talion from Marnius, and there's a copy of Talion on the side of blue farm. And I'm getting down to like, I think I start this turn at like 17 life, and trust me, when you're taking 4 damage for every 2 drop, it goes away rather fast. The short version of this story is I play Underworld Breach, I Demonic Tutor, I go to play Lotus Petal into the blind obedience, it comes in tapped, I feel like a dummy, we keep going. I then Demonic Tutor for Lion's Eye Diamond. For those who don't know, Lion's Eye Diamond actually does not need to be untapped to be able to win the game, right? Lion's Eye Diamond can still crack and be tapped. It has nothing to do with tapping in its cost, right? So then I get Lion's Eye Diamond, and I am just ripping through portions of my deck. Now my opponents are under Ranger Captain, but I have to do one of my least favorite things, which is start going Lion's Eye Diamond, Wheel of Fortune. Now you might be asking yourself, like, we are at time here, right? Turn 0. So you might be saying like, well, there's an Angel's Grace on the board. What are you even digging for in this scenario, right? There is a rule interaction that many people are not aware of, where basically Angel's Grace wears off during the cleanup step. So the way this interaction works is that Angel's Grace goes away in the cleanup step of a turn, which is still in the turn, right? So Angel's Grace will technically wear off during my turn. It's in a place where nobody has priority, right? So there's no shenanigans that can be done. But if for some reason someone dies to state-based actions in my cleanup step, it's still during my turn before the turn is ended. So what I do is I have to get infinite mana, because when I get infinite mana, I can pump Kenrith up so that he has infinite power and toughness. That's relevant because commander damage is checked with state-based actions, right? So if I have a lethal amount of commander damage on somebody, they will die in the end step to commander damage, right? So I can kill blue farm player with normal damage, right? Doesn't matter. As long as Kenrith is able to trample over, which Kenrith has trample and haste, right? And can make itself infinitely large with infinite mana. As long as Kenrith has trample and can do that, basically as long as I have infinite mana and I have access to Kenrith, I can still win under an Angel's Grace, right? My opponents are silenced during this point. And yeah, I have to start getting very creative here. I just start going wheel, lines of diamond, wheel, lines of diamond, wheel, lines of diamond, ripping through stuff. My opponents don't really have anything here. I realized afterwards that I made this infinitely more hard on myself than I needed to. I forgot that Kenrith can gain you life. So the reason I wasn't just going for LED Brain Freeze was because I was getting close to lethal amounts of damage, and every time I cast a 2-drop, I would take 4 damage. But I forgot that I could just play Lion's Eye Diamond, crack it, give myself 3 white mana, and gain 5 life so that I can cast a 2-drop. Made this so much harder on myself than it ever needed to be. And that part sucked a lot. I now know that it's something you can do with Kenrith. I just completely forgot about that ability on the card because the whole day I'd used the Trample Haste, I'd used the Reanimate, I used the counters, I used the draw card. I just didn't use the life gain ever because it didn't feel like it was relevant ever. And I completely forgot about it. Had Kenrith on board the whole time. Could have easily just gained myself 10 life and then breached through my entire deck and got everything I needed to win. But I didn't, because if I cast Brain Freeze twice at any point, I would have milled like 60 cards in, which is more than enough to gain myself like 20 something life and then not worry about the Tallians anymore. But I just completely forgot about all of this stuff. So what instead I end up doing is get a very complex board state in which I have to continually cast Wheel of Fortune, cast Lion's Eye Diamond, cast Wheel of Fortune, cast Lion's Eye Diamond, ripping cards, until eventually I sculpt my graveyard down enough to where there is a Emil in my graveyard and there is a Dockside in my graveyard. And I'm able to go, okay, not even really enough mana to like do anything crazy, but I have enough to specifically reanimate the Dockside, get enough treasures, reanimate the Emil, get enough treasures. I think they had 4 between the two of them, which is exactly enough to make it work. There's other options to like how I could like get through this process, but I eventually get to the point where I get both of these 2 cards onto my battlefield. And I'm like, can I propose the Emil loop? My opponents finally say yes to it after, once again, like probably a 20-minute turn, just trying to piece this together because the combination of, oh, and also, right, how could I forget? I have to do all of this and get the Abrupt Decay to destroy the Blind Obedience so that I can do this loop. I completely forgotten about this step. Now you're starting to see how frustrating this process was and why, if I had the Brain Freeze LED thing figured out earlier, I could have saved myself, oh, I don't know, 20 minutes. Like, just full silliness that I missed that very important part of text on Kenrith. But TLDR, I Wheel Breach, Wheel Breach, Wheel Breach, Wheel Breach, hit the Abrupt Decay, hit the Blind Obedience, reanimate the Dockside, reanimate the Emil, present infinite mana, go to combat, take out our player with the Angel's Grace with Kenrith, take out the other player with my other creatures, move to the cleanup step, Angel's Grace squares off, both my opponents die. GG's. With that 16 points, because that leaves me with 3 wins, 1 loss, 1 draw, which, because there were actually a bunch of draws in this tournament, not through people intentionally drawing, but through just matches going long, because Massachusetts tends to be a very mid-range place, right? Like I know we're in mid-range hell as a whole right now, but like there's a lot of very grindy decks in Massachusetts. So the other players had something like 15, 13 points like respectively, but with 16 points, I was able to clinch top seed. So I'm able to go right to the finals because it's a top 10 cut. I'm able to skip the semifinals, give myself a break, get dinner, all of the lovely things. Yeah, which was awesome. Okay, so the finals match. It's myself, Tameshi, and 2 Sisei Clam Chowderlists. So yeah, I mean, once again, we're playing in Massachusetts. There's 2 people on Clam Chowder. So turn 1, just play an Esper Sentinel, keep it nice and easy, but also pretty good play for turn 1. Taveshi goes Urza Saga into Mana Crypt, Sisei, Dork Pass, right? Turn 2, I play a land, pass, hold up interaction. Tameshi plays a Smothering Tithe. Sisei goes Soul Ring into Sisei. 4th player goes no land, pass. Nothing in the end step. Turn 3, I play a Dockside that makes 5. After Smothering Tithe cracks a bunch of their treasures, I play a Ristic Study, hold up, Path to Exile, and a Miscast, and I also play a Mana Dork, right? So feel pretty good about the Dockside there, right? You know, I don't always love to just like put a Dockside on the field for people to clone, but having both Ristic and Mana Up and stuff to do with it, I'm like, we'll take those for sure. Tameshi plays Grafdigger's Cage and a counterbalance. Definitely locking things down a little bit. Sisei, player 3, passes with mana available. Player 4 on player 3's end step. Player 4 goes Worldly Tutor for Dockside. I don't interact because of counterbalance, but counterbalance reveals a Hullbreaker Horror on top, which is not exactly great to be able to stop any of the dockside lines, right? I also have Heuristic Study on the field, right? So for me, I'm kind of in the scenario where I'm like, okay, if player 4 just starts jamming here, I am pretty okay to hold up interaction and get fed a bunch from Heuristic Study, and then Tameshi's using their interaction on them as well, right? So Dockside for 9 comes down from this player 4 Sisei. They then follow up with the Grand Abolisher. I have nothing. Player 3 silences. So the Grand Abolisher was the immediate punish play. Thank goodness player 3 Sisei does have the silence up. Once again, I definitely also could have miscast that Worldly Tutor, and I really was thinking about it, but I sort of passed on it and then kind of realized afterwards, like maybe I should have thought about that a little bit longer, right? But I did also, once again, want to draw this card from Heuristic, so definitely went for a bit of a greedier line. Player 4 Flusterstorms the Silence. I play my Mindbreak Trap, clearing the stack. Then things go down. The Sisei in 4th seat then still casts, I play the Mindbreak Trap to clear everything that player 4 has in the stack, including the Grand Abolisher and the Flusterstorms, right? Player 4 Sisei then tries to Fierce Guardianship, targeting the Silence. I hit that with the miscast that I've said I've had in my hand for a while, and all of that cleared, right? And the Mindbreak Trap was also one of the reasons I was feeling confident in sort of just letting the Sisei try and pop off. Once again, Grand Abolisher could have been the ultimate punish there, but thank God the player Sisei had the silence there for player 3. So at this point, I have a bunch of stuff in my hand. My opponent's dockside count is pretty high, right? But there is, my docksides aren't in the field, and there's a Grafdigger's Cage, right? So I can't start doing the Phantasmal Image loop. I do tutor for the Phantasmal Image, right? To be able to get things going. I already have Kinnan and Agatha in hand, right? But I didn't have like win condition until this point. So I play the Phantasmal Image, which makes 12 treasures. We're all about that. I get the Kinnan out there, and now, so basically with that, I have access to 24 mana. I play the Agatha, and I start pumping the Agatha so that Agatha has enough to reduce Kenrith's abilities by 3. And then I just start paying blue and making myself draw a card into the Smothering Tithe, which was a little sketchy, unfortunately. I didn't really have any other options there, except for giving them Tameshi a bunch of treasures. But I also noticed they didn't interact with player 4 Sisei, so I'm hopeful that means that they're out of gas. But, afterwards I realized they still had one thing. So I just start once again paying 1 mana to draw a card. I've made 24 mana worth of treasures at this point, right? And I just start drawing cards. I cast Intuition. I'm like, okay, I can go get 3 answers for the Grafdigger's Cage here, and then I can start executing my loop, right? No matter what my opponents give me, I can get something that'll answer it, or I can just get a different type of win condition as well, right? So that they have no good options. Tameshi hard casts the Fierce Guardianship, targeting it. I cast an Offer You Can't Refuse to fight back, and then the player 3 Sisei has a mental misstep, hits my offer, right? So I'm like, okay, I gotta fight over this, try and get an answer here, or if I draw another tutor, I'll just stop fighting over this and go for something else, right? So draw a card off of Kenrith, and it's an Imperial Seal. I'm like, great, I can just play the Imperial Seal, crack it by drawing a card with Kenrith, and then go for whatever I need, right? So I let all of my stuff get countered. The offer gets misstepped, the intuition gets Fierce Guardianship. Play the Imperial Seal. Nobody has an answer for the Imperial Seal because after we've used I think like 7 pieces of interaction on the table, everyone's finally done. I go grab an Abrupt Decay. I Abrupt Decay the Grafdigger's Cage, which leaves me enough mana to be able to then start executing my Phantasmal Image loop and present infinite damage and win the game. I don't remember exactly how I do it, if I go through the combat win or if I do the draw thing, but it doesn't really matter at that point. That is the story of how I was able to win the King's Court It's Gonna Be May 2K tournament. Was feeling great about the deck. The deck was really awesome. I loved playing it. It was a blast. It definitely brings me back to my roots, playing something like Dawnwaker, where there's a lot of that creature combo layered aspects to it, but you get black for tutors, you get opposition agent, you get bowmasters, you get mayhem devil stuff, you get Talion, which I love. You get a bunch of stuff. You get all the 5-color cool good stuff soup. You get to play things like Emrakul if you're crazy like me and you want to. And yeah, I had a great time playing this list. As I mentioned, I took it to the Queen and Rook opening tournament the very next day, and it was able to top 4 that tournament as well, which had like 76 players in it. So obviously I'm feeling great about this list. And you know, as I mentioned at the start of the video, didn't really get time to do the full Queen and Rick summary, but long story short, awesome store, had a great time playing there, all that good stuff. Yeah, can't rave enough about how much of a good time I'm having at these King's Court tournaments. They are 2Ks held every couple months. The owner's awesome. The players playing there are awesome. Massachusetts has a really healthy meta full of really good players too, which is like, feels really great to say. I was so sad that like all these great players came after I had left, but you know, that's part of it too, right? So no, I truly love going there. I love hanging out at that store. As I mentioned, all the info for King's Court is going to be in the description down below this video. And yeah, it was an awesome time. This list has been so much fun to play. It's definitely one that is going to be in my roster for a while. I felt really good playing it. It's definitely, you know, greedier in some areas and more unique in other areas, and has way different points of attack than other lists I've worked on. So really happy to work on Kenrith. It was a really fun deck. Plays a lot of my favorite cards, plays a lot of Dockside, plays a lot of creature stuff, while also doing like the good stuff part of cEDH too as well, right? So it was an awesome time. Let me know what y'all think of this tournament. Let me know if you guys think about the deck, if there's anything cool or interesting you see going through these lists, if there's any like standout moments you think are worth noting. Let me know in the comments down below. This was an awesome time. Obviously the deck performed very well for me. So definitely recommend it to the folks who are out there looking to use it. You know, if you're into a Dockside deck, this is a Dockside deck for sure, right? It is a deck that cares a lot about that card. But I really enjoyed using Kenrith. It feels really good to have a commander that like does stuff in the command zone. It does a lot of stuff. And Kenrith is a card that, for those who've been following the channel for a long time, back in my Pod King days, know that I really liked Kenrith. I've just taken a break from playing him for quite some time. So it feels good to sort of get back in the saddle and play a little bit of King Kenny again. Yeah, the deck was a blast. Genuinely has a lot of cool pivot lines. Obviously featured a decent amount of strength with the performances this weekend. So very happy with it. Thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you enjoy these tournament summaries, let me know. And if you need any of the information about the deck from today or the store's info for the King's Court game, as I mentioned, all of that will be in the description down below. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and can't thank you enough for being here, supporting this channel. I know I've been talking about Patreon a lot lately without having any good action, but I've figured out a bunch of stuff I'm doing. I polled my patrons earlier today with some specific questions in the Discord, so we'll see what happens with that. And I'm very excited to be pushing back for that more, because Patreon needs a little bit of dusting off. So, all right, everybody, have an amazing day, and I'll catch y'all later. Bye.
I'm shining without you, so bright, baby, so bright. Focus on me, focus on me, focus on me, focus on me. All thanks to you, I shine brighter than ever. All thanks to you, I'm happy, happier than ever. I never found someone like that's right. I'll guys at you. Get up on